William Howard Taft was President of the United States. He was a very large man. That much is clear when you look at old pictures of him. He was a big person, bigger than most people, and especially big for his time. This was a fact of his life. It affected how he moved, how he dressed, and even how he bathed. This is why President Taft needed a special giant bathtub. It was not a luxury item he just wanted. It was a real need. Think about the early 1900s. Things were different then. Homes were built differently. Appliances were different. Plumbing was not what it is today. Bathtubs were smaller. They were often made of cast iron, sometimes with feet standing in the middle of a room. These tubs were made for the average person, but William Howard Taft was not an average person in size. He weighed over 300 pounds for much of his adult life. At times, he was closer to 350 pounds. This amount of weight, this sheer volume of a human body, simply did not fit into a standard bathtub of that era. It's easy to picture the problem. Imagine a man of great stature, great width, trying to lower himself into a tub meant for someone half his size. It would be uncomfortable, to say the least. But more than that, it would be almost impossible. He would not be able to sit down properly. He could not stretch out his legs. He would be cramped, squeezed, and unable to wash himself with any ease or dignity. For a man in his position, a man who represented the country, this was more than just a personal bother. It was a constant challenge to his daily routine. Bathing was and is a basic human need. But in the early 20th century, the luxury of a personal bathtub in every home was still quite new. Many people still use wash basins and pitchers of water for their daily hygiene. So the bathtubs that did exist in more modern homes or hotels were not built with extreme variations in body size in mind. They were standardized to what was then considered typical. This standard was far too small for Taft. So the need for a special tub was not a whim. It was a practical necessity for President Taft to simply carry out his personal hygiene. This was not about making a statement. It was about solving a real everyday problem that most people never had to think about. He needed a tub that could hold his frame, allow him to sit, to wash, and to get out again without struggle. It had to be wide enough, long enough, and strong enough. His size was well known. It was part of his public image. He was a big man with a big laugh and a big appetite. But his size also brought practical difficulties. Finding clothes that fit was one thing. Finding a chair that was comfortable and sturdy enough was another. And then there was the bathtub. This was perhaps the most intimate and challenging of these problems. It wasn't something he could easily adapt to. The tub itself had to adapt to him. The fact that this story has stuck around for so long tells us something. It was memorable. It was unusual. It highlights a very human aspect of a historical figure. Taft was a president, a Supreme Court justice, a man of great intelligence and accomplishment. But he was also a person with physical realities that made certain parts of life difficult. The bathtub story is a window into those realities. It shows that even presidents face mundane yet significant personal challenges. It makes him more relatable, in a way, despite his grand position. The need for a special tub wasn't just about comfort. It was about function. A president has a demanding schedule. He needs to be clean, presentable, and able to perform his duties without unnecessary stress. The struggle with a too small bathtub would have been a daily, frustrating ordeal. It would have taken up valuable time and energy. So providing a suitable bathing facility was not a luxury. It was part of ensuring the president could function effectively. It was about practical support for the man holding the highest office in the land. This problem wasn't unique to the White House. It followed him wherever he traveled, whether to a hotel, a private residence, or, as history records, even a naval vessel. The world was simply not built for William Howard Taft. The problem of President Taft's size in bathtubs wasn't just an idea. It became a very real, very public, and somewhat embarrassing predicament. It happened most famously during a trip on the USS Augusta. This was a naval ship, and naval ships, by their nature, have compact spaces. Everything is built to be efficient and save space. This includes the bathrooms and the bathtubs on board. These tubs were standard for the era, designed for naval officers, not for a man of Taft's enormous build. So there he was, on the USS Augusta, likely sometime in 1909 or 1910, early in his presidency. He needed to take a bath. He probably expected the usual challenge, the squeeze, the struggle. But this particular tub was too much. He managed to get in, he lowered himself into the tight space. But getting out proved to be much harder. He got stuck. He was wedged in the tub. Imagine the scene. The President of the United States, a man of immense dignity and power, stuck in a bathtub on a naval vessel. It's a moment that mixes humor with a very real sense of difficulty. It wasn't just that he was uncomfortable. He literally could not get himself out of the tub. It took several people to help him. They had to pull and lift to free him from the confines of the too small tub. This was not a private struggle. It became a story, a well-known anecdote that circulated and further cemented the idea of Taft's great size in the public imagination. This incident wasn't an isolated event. It was a culmination of many such struggles. Before the Augusta incident, Taft had already been encountering difficulties with standard fixtures in the White House, in hotels, and in other places he visited. The Augusta just made it undeniably clear that a solution was urgently needed. The presidency involves a lot of travel. Taft traveled a fair amount, even in those days. Each new place presented a potential new bathtub crisis. This was not sustainable. Standard bathtubs of the early 1900s were typically around 2.5 feet wide and 5 to 5.5 feet long. For someone weighing 350 pounds, who also stood quite tall, these dimensions were simply inadequate. He needed space to sit, to move his arms and legs, to properly wash himself. A normal tub would have been like trying to fit a large sofa into a small closet. It just wasn't going to work. Beyond the physical fit, there was also the structural issue. A man of Taft's weight, combined with the weight of a tub full of water, put a significant strain on bathroom floors. Old buildings like the White House were not always built with such heavy loads in mind. This meant that any solution had to consider not just the tub itself, but also the floor and the plumbing system that would support it. It was a mini engineering challenge. The embarrassment of the Augusta incident truly highlighted the problem. A president should not be in a situation where he needs several aides to help him out of a bathtub. It diminished his public image, even if only in a humorous way. It showed that despite his power, he was still vulnerable to very human, very physical limitations. And it showed that those limitations needed to be addressed. So the need for a special giant bathtub was born out of repeated experience. And finally, a somewhat mortifying public or semi-public event. It wasn't about presidential luxury. It was about presidential necessity. It became clear that the standard world was simply not built to accommodate William Howard Taft, and modifications were needed to ensure his comfort, his dignity, and his ability to perform his duties without such basic yet significant physical obstacles. The stage was set for the creation of a truly unique piece of presidential history. This wasn't going to be a quick fix. It would require special design and special craftsmanship. The situation demanded a practical and robust solution that would truly address the scale of the president's needs. After the famous incident on the USS Augusta, where President Taft found himself stuck in a regular-sized bathtub, it became clear that a permanent solution was necessary. The Navy, responsible for the comfort and well-being of the president when he traveled on their ships, took action. They commissioned a truly special bathtub. This wasn't just a slightly bigger tub. This was a custom-built, industrial-grade bathing machine designed specifically for the president's needs. The job went to the William F. Schimpf and Brothers Plumbing Company in Baltimore, Maryland. They were tasked with creating something extraordinary. This was no small order. They had to build a bathtub that was robust enough, large enough, and safe enough to accommodate the president's considerable weight. They couldn't just scale up a standard design, they had to rethink it from the ground up. The materials chosen for this monumental tub were not the typical cast iron or porcelain you might find in a home. This tub was made of metal. It was a heavy-duty construction, likely using sheets of copper or brass, reinforced to ensure it could withstand the weight of both the water and the president. Copper, in particular, was a common material for high-quality, durable plumbing fixtures of the era. It could be shaped and soldered to create a watertight, incredibly strong vessel. The dimensions of this custom tub were impressive. It was reported to be 7 feet long and 4 feet wide. To give you an idea of how big that is, a standard modern bathtub is usually about 5 to 6 feet long and 2.5 to 2.75 feet wide. So Taft's tub was a full foot or more longer and nearly twice as wide as a typical tub. This was a truly massive fixture. It was designed so that he could sit comfortably with enough space around him to wash, and crucially, enough leverage to get himself in and out without assistance. Imagine the craftsmanship involved. Metal workers would have carefully cut, bent, and soldered these large sheets of metal. They would have needed special tools and expertise to ensure the tub was perfectly watertight and structurally sound. It wasn't just a tub, it was almost like a small pool or a large trough, built with the precision of a ship's component. The weight of this tub itself, empty, would have been substantial. Then, consider the volume of water it would hold. A tub, 7 feet long, and 4 feet wide, even if only filled partially, would contain many gallons of water. This meant that the floor supporting it had to be specially reinforced. This wasn't just a tub that could be dropped into any bathroom. Its installation required careful planning and structural adjustments. On a ship like the Augusta, this meant making sure the deck could bear the immense weight without strain. The cost of such a custom-made, oversized, heavy-duty fixture would have been significant. This wasn't a cheap item, but for the President of the United States after the previous incident, it was deemed a necessary investment. It was a matter of ensuring the President's dignity and personal comfort while performing his duties. Once built, this giant tub was installed in the USS Augusta. It was likely placed in the President's suite or a specially designated presidential bathroom. The hope was that this custom solution would prevent any further embarrassing incidents and allow President Taft to bathe with ease during his naval travels. While the Augusta tub is the most famous example, it's also worth noting that similar considerations were likely made for Taft's needs elsewhere. The White House itself might have seen modifications, though historical accounts focus more on a special shower being installed there rather than a custom tub of the same scale as the one on the Augusta. The White House plumbing was also upgraded during his time, and it's reasonable to assume that his personal needs for sturdy and accessible bathing facilities were part of those considerations. But the image of the specially commissioned, enormous metal bathtub for the ship remains the defining story of his bathing challenges. It was a testament to the practical lengths people had to go to accommodate the unique physical presence of President William Howard Taft. It was truly a marvel of early 20th century plumbing and engineering, born purely out of necessity. The story of President Taft's special giant bathtub didn't stay a secret. News of it spread. In an era before instant communication, stories still traveled quickly, especially stories about the president. It became a public curiosity and often a source of gentle humor. This particular detail about Taft, his weight, and his struggles with bathtubs became a defining characteristic in the public eye. Newspapers of the time loved such anecdotes. They were always looking for stories that humanized public figures, especially the president. The bathtub incident and the subsequent commissioning of a giant tub fit perfectly. It was relatable, even if most people didn't share the same problem. Everyone understood the need for a bath, and everyone could imagine the difficulty of not fitting into one. Political cartoonists in particular had a field day with it. Taft's physical size was already a popular subject for their drawings. He was often depicted as a very large man, sometimes in a slightly exaggerated way. The bathtub story added a new dimension to these caricatures. You can find old cartoons showing Taft struggling with a tiny tub or jubilantly sitting in his new, enormous one. These cartoons were usually lighthearted, not mean-spirited. They reflected a public fascination with the president's unique situation. The humor surrounding the bathtub was largely good-natured. Taft himself was known for his genial personality and his ability to laugh at himself. He didn't seem to mind the jokes about his size. In fact, his good humor probably helped diffuse any potential for genuine offense. People saw him as a jovial, approachable figure despite his imposing physical presence and powerful office. The bathtub story just reinforced this image of a big man with a big heart, facing very human challenges. This public interest in the bathtub tells us a lot about the culture of the early 20th century. People were highly interested in the personal lives of their leaders. There wasn't the same level of strict privacy we expect for public figures today. Details like a president getting stuck in a bathtub or needing a custom one were seen as interesting tidbits that helped people feel more connected to the person in power. It made the president seem less like an untouchable figure and more like a real person with real-world problems, albeit on a grander scale. The bathtub story also served as a kind of metaphor for Taft's overall presidency. He was seen as a man who sometimes struggled with the sheer weight of his office, and also the expectations placed upon him. His physical size became intertwined with his political persona. It wasn't always fair, but it was how the public often perceived him. The bathtub, a simple object, became a symbol of his bigness in all aspects of life. It's important to remember that such details shape a public image. While Taft was known for his intellect, his legal background, and his progressive policies, the bathtub story became one of those persistent, quirky facts that many people associated with him. For some, it might have been the first or only thing they remembered about his time in office. This is often how history works. Certain vivid, relatable anecdotes stick in the collective memory more than detailed policy debates. The fact that the government went to such lengths commissioning a custom industrial-strength bathtub also showed the unique status of the president. The resources of the nation could be marshaled to solve even a personal problem if it affected the dignity or functionality of the commander-in-chief. It was a tangible example of how the needs of the highest office were prioritized, even down to something as mundane as bathing facilities. So, the giant bathtub wasn't just a physical object, it was a cultural artifact. It reflected a society's fascination with its leaders, a leader's own good-natured acceptance of his unique situation, and the practical demands placed upon an executive office. It became a part of the Taft legend, a story that would be told and retold for generations. It showed that even a president, a man who led a nation, still had to deal with the very basic requirements of being human, sometimes with unexpected and amusing results. The story of President Taft and his giant bathtub is more than just a funny anecdote. It's a piece of history that has stuck around, and it continues to tell us things about the man, his era, and how we remember leaders. This particular detail has a lasting splash in the historical record, becoming one of the most recognizable facts about William Howard Taft. Why does this story endure? It's simple, really. It's memorable because it's so specific and so human. Most people don't think about a president's daily routines, like taking a bath. When a story emerges that highlights such a personal, everyday struggle, especially one that requires such an extreme solution, it grabs attention. It makes history accessible. It takes a powerful, somewhat abstract figure like a president and grounds him in a very tangible, relatable problem. We all understand needing a comfortable space to relax and get clean. The giant bathtub also serves as a vivid reminder of Taft's physical presence. While his policies and legal career are significant, his size is often the first thing many people recall. The bathtub story perfectly encapsulates this aspect of his life. It gives a concrete example of the practical implications of his build, beyond just seeing a photograph. It puts his scale into perspective, turning an abstract number his weight into a functional challenge. What happened to the actual bathtub? The most famous one, the one made for the USS Augusta, likely remained with the ship for a time. Naval vessels are often refitted or decommissioned over the years, and it's uncertain if that specific custom tub survived or was eventually scrapped along with other components. It was a functional piece of equipment for a specific need, rather than an artifact destined for a museum, though today it would surely be a prized possession. The White House, as mentioned, adapted with a special shower rather than an equally oversized tub. The original tubs in the White House were standard, and any modifications there would have focused on reinforcement and accessibility rather than a complete overhaul of the tub itself to the scale of the Augusta one. The tale of the bathtub reflects a period when customization was more common for unique needs. Mass production and standardization were growing, but for something so specialized, a tailor-made solution was the only answer. It speaks to the ingenuity and resourcefulness of the time, that when confronted with an unusual problem, people found practical ways to solve it. It shows a certain can-do spirit. Beyond the practicalities, the bathtub story also tells us about Taft's character. He could have been embarrassed or tried to hide this difficulty. Instead, he faced it with good humor. His willingness to let such stories circulate, even if they sometimes poked fun at him, speaks to his approachable nature. It paints him as a man who was secure enough in himself and his position not to be overly sensitive about his physical characteristics. This good nature was a key part of his appeal to the American public. Ultimately, the giant bathtub reminds us that historical figures are complex individuals. They are not just names in textbooks or faces in portraits. They are people with bodies, needs, and sometimes very particular challenges. These details humanize them. They make the past feel less distant and more relatable. The struggles of a president to fit into a bathtub might seem small in the grand scheme of national policy, but they reveal an important layer of the human experience that connects us across time. So, the next time you hear about President Taft, you might think of his significant contributions to law and public service, or you might just picture him in his enormous, custom-built bathtub. Either way, that image of a man and his tub serves as a curious and enduring symbol. It's a reminder that even the highest office in the land can involve very down-to-earth problems, and that sometimes a special giant solution is exactly what's needed. It's a little slice of history that continues to make people smile and ponder the unique circumstances of a truly unique president. It underscores how deeply personal and practical details can become lasting parts of a public legacy. This simple custom fixture became a quiet testament to the man it was made for, forever linking his name to its extraordinary dimensions.